Welcome to the Crossing Church. This is the version of the crossing that goes where you go and delivers what you need. Fresh perspectives on faith and Jesus with practical, real-life next steps built in. This is your place to explore faith and experience the life-changing ways of Jesus.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for the Crossings online service. My name is Josh Carman, I'm the outreach pastor here, and I'm so excited that we get to be together for the next few minutes. We're in a series called The Genius of Jesus, where we're talking about the person of Jesus and all of his brilliance. Last week we covered Jesus' miraculous feeding of 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and fish. And in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Jesus' encounter with an unlikely character who will help change the course of history. But first, I want to tell you a little story. Now, when I was a little boy growing up in the Philippines in the early 90s, I was a problematic kid. I used to hit my brothers, I used to pull their hair, I used to scratch and bite until people bled, or until my parents stepped in and stopped me. Now, there's this one particular instance that I remember where I was being incredibly disrespectful to my entire family. I'm probably like 3 or 4 at the time. I recall mouthing off, hitting my brother, telling my mom that I was essentially going to do whatever I wanted. You see, I used to like to make my mom upset on purpose because I enjoyed getting a rise out of her. And in these moments, I knew that I was going to get a spanking sooner or later, right? And while I never liked getting those spankings, I kind of knew at a young age with the level of disrespect that I brought to the home, they kind of came with the territory. And it was at this time that my mom went to spank me after one particularly horrendous day that I had been behaving. And I had taken some books, and I actually hid them in my pants so that the impact wouldn't hurt as much when she hit me. And you have to know that for my 4-year-old mind, I thought that this was the definition of brilliance, right? It was this, I had somehow figured out a way to continue to do whatever I wanted, and ultimately I wouldn't have to pay the consequences for my actions. However, being 4, I hadn't quite considered the reality that my mom could just simply take the books out of my pants. But I do have to tell you, for that moment, I felt like a true genius. The sound of the thud that was made when my mom's hand came down and actually hit the nursery book instead of my butt, and her look at me like I was crazy. I thought it was so awesome. You see, when we think of a book as people, right, it's clear what the set of uses are, right? It's for helping people learn, get literate, and things like that. But what I was doing was something that was not actually using it for its intended purpose. And I thought that this is what made me clever, right? I had actually taken something and subverted it for something else, right? I had turned my mom's expectations of what was going to happen upside down, and I had outsmarted her. Rather, all I was actually doing, right, was setting myself up to be spanked again. Now, I love the story because it gives us a glimpse into the interaction with our Bible passage today. We're going to be examining Mark 7:24 through 30. And today we're going to discover what I think is Jesus' greatest example of his genius in the Gospels. It's how Jesus subverts expectations and replaces them with new reality. You see, in the world that we see in Jesus, it's one where the last are first. One where the oppressed are free, where the marginalized are heard and loved, where the outsider is welcomed to the table, and where those who have been forgotten are championed and celebrated. And you can already immediately know that the kind of world I just described there is so different from what we see in our world today, right? We often separate ourselves by a variety of identifying factors: race, money, power, job, marriage, single, Democrat, Republican, etc. All of these labels we use to help create clarity and understanding when we're doing them at our best. But when we're using them at our worst, we typically use these titles to put people in boxes so we don't have to spend time getting to know them. And what we're going to see today is an example of Jesus taking some well-known and believed assumptions in his day and subverting them. That is to say, he's going to turn those ideas on their head, exposing them for how foolish they actually are. So with that, let's go ahead and we can jump in our story together and find out more about the genius of Jesus. Mark 7:24 through 30 reads like this. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house, and he did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found her child lying in the bed and the demon gone. Now, I want to stop for a moment here. We have to ask ourselves, did Jesus really just call this woman a dog? Did he just say this ethnic slur? Right now, I'm not sure if you have kids, but I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. And a couple of years ago, we were visiting my wife's family in Hawaii. And during that time, my daughter got her hand stuck in an elevator door. And I remember the feeling of helplessness and wishing someone would be able to do something to make the pain go away. I can only imagine how the Syrophoenician woman felt. Right, her daughter had been struggling with a demonic possession, and there was supposedly this man who could help. And the first thing he does is fire off what would have been understood as this ethnic racial slur towards this woman. So why does this happen? Right? I can only imagine how I would have felt in that moment. So as the reader, what we need to do is we got to ask ourselves, like, why is Jesus saying such a problematic set of words? Why is this response so mean, especially when before that he had just been subverting all of these old ideas of Jewish traditions? So one thing you need to know when reading the Bible, one of the things that is so crucial is understanding the term context, right? And we figure out context by looking at what came before our current verses and what comes after. Right? In the previous section, Jesus just spends a great amount of time talking specifically to these religious leaders and redefining what the idea is of what makes a person clean or unclean. You see, in the first century, you didn't necessarily have access to a shower, and you lived in the desert, so it was way easy to get dirty. Thus, for Jewish people and Jewish religious leaders, cleanliness was actually a big deal, and they would often not associate with people that they considered unclean. So in Mark 7, 1 through 23, Jesus has just flipped this notion of cleanliness on its head. He basically says, it's not what's on the outside that makes you unclean, it's what's on the inside. And after he does this, he then leaves to go to a place called Tyre, which is a non-Jewish city. And this immediately would have been an insult to those religious leaders from earlier in the chapter, right? And this in and of itself is a big move. But when we see where our story begins, we encounter Jesus meeting this woman who's a Gentile or a non-Jew, and he's meeting her in this non-Jewish city in a private home. And as a Jewish rabbi, he's connecting with this non-Jew immediately. What we see is he's working to create a culture of equality, irrespective of what the societal differences and expectations were at the time. You see, this woman is seeking healing for her daughter. And it's her willingness to beg, Jesus indicates, that is a genuine desire that the religious people who are actually trying to kill him don't have. And this is of critical consequence. Because like we said earlier in the chapter, Jesus stated that there was nothing on the outside that could defile, right? Instead, it's the things from the inside that matter most. It's your heart, right? And the religious people were missing this, and they were messing up God's word by not paying attention to the reality that God desires for all people to have a chance to be in his family. So immediately we're at our first point together today. Jesus does not care for superficial norms. So what does this mean? Jesus in this portion of the story is, by his actions, saying that the kingdom that he has come to set up and establish is one that includes all people who are willing to have faith in him. By merely speaking with her, he's validating her existence, her concerns, and her desires in a way that speaks out against the cultural norms of his day. All right, so let's reread their conversation together. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he, being Jesus, told her. For it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And then he told her, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. All right, this woman is taking a huge risk as an outsider to be there in contact with Jesus and the disciples. Right, specifically from a Jewish perspective, Jesus would have been well in his proper behavior to not speak with her or even refuse to see her. But again, even that mere instance of encountering her, what he does is he flips the cultural norms by engaging with her in this dialogue. Now, it's made clear to us what the woman wants, right? She's hoping to find healing for her daughter who's experiencing demon possession. Now, while you and I know nothing about the daughter, we do know that by this mother's willingness to take such a big social risk, that she is desperate and determined. If there's even a 1% chance that talking to this Jesus fellow might provide relief for her child, then she will do it. In other words, she has faith. And typically what we'd expect to find here is a Jesus who is willing to heal her, right? A Jesus who says, great job, faithful person, go live happily ever after. But like we mentioned earlier, what Jesus actually does seems both weird and at odds with how he's behaved in the first part of this chapter. You see, before this time, right, he's been making all these statements about why the customs that were held by the Jewish leaders and the people were not correct, and their assumptions about people who looked different than them were wrong. And now, by calling this woman a dog, it actually seems that he's like stepping into and backtracking and reaffirming those stereotypes by employing this racist trope. So what's going on here? It's important to know that Jesus is actually employing a rhetorical technique called parastic irony. All right, that's a strange word, odd word, but the notion here is that parastic irony is actually intended to declare the opposite of the speaker's actual intention. You see, what Jesus is doing here is he's utilizing a common Jewish thought about non-Jewish people, aka their dogs, and he's then setting up the Syrophoenician woman to enter into the metaphor and further it, thus showing that the standard notion of what Jewish people thought about those outsiders was not actually wrong, but it is also the opposite of what God's kingdom is going to actually look like. Right? And this is the true genius of Jesus on display here. The ability that Jesus has to turn the world on its head is impeccable. And what's generally intended as this xenophobic or ethnic or racial slur, Jesus instead uses it as a vehicle to declare that not only are all people clean, all people matter to God, and all people are welcome at the table if they have faith in Jesus. You see, it is important to understand the perspective on dogs in the cultural context is crucial for recognizing both the offensive and the subversive element in Jesus' language. For the Jewish people, there is an extreme dislike for dogs in their culture. They consider dogs defiled and unclean creatures who scavenge the countryside, eating garbage and vomit and even corpses. There are all sorts of Old Testament references to that. This is why they were considered the most despicable, insolent, and miserable of creatures. The term also referred more broadly, right, to the peoples that were Israel's enemies. And so the fact that Jesus is using this ethnic slur is indeed problematic to the ears of the original audience and would be to you and me as well if he doesn't do that flipping of it on its head. All right, and this actually leads us to our second point together. Jesus' kingdom encompasses anyone who will have faith in him. You see, this is where we tend to get it wrong as followers of Jesus. We tend to think that once we cross that line of faith and put our hope and trust in Christ, that we are officially on the inside. Right? And we can see these clear delineated lines between who's in and who's out. But if we're not careful, what we end up doing is adding lines that Jesus never meant to exist in the first place. What we'll do is we'll begin to separate people out based on superficial things, like politics, like the color of someone's skin, like their socioeconomic status. And if we're not careful, we become a people who are so concerned with being on the inside that we forget that Jesus actually always existed for the outsider. It's Jesus' desire in the big picture that was to reconcile all women and men to himself, to show that there is this arc of an inclusion that will include all people on the earth, even those that you and I may not be able to stand. I want to camp on this point for a moment. I want you to take a moment and examine in your own heart and mind. Who are the people that you are keeping on the outside? Who are those people that you keep on the outside of the circle? You see, what Jesus is doing here is a clear repudiation to the religious people of his day. He's saying, how dare you think that you have the ability to decide who is in and who is out of the kingdom of heaven? That's not your call to make. That decision is made by me and me alone, Jesus says. And so when that woman steps into the debate with Jesus, it's important to recognize two things here. First, she's the only person in the entire Gospel of Mark to step into a parable given by Jesus and further it. And additionally, in the Greek reading of the text, it's actually because of this woman's wit and her rhetorical insight that Jesus actually heals her daughter. Right? She's entered into this verbal repartee with Jesus and she beats him. It's the logic that this woman employs that, according to the text, convinces Jesus to perform the miracle. Right? This is so powerful because it's in this moment that the woman has done something that the Pharisees can't do, that the religious leaders can't do, that the disciples haven't even done at this point. That is to say that she has shown this brilliant capacity for insight and understanding. This woman, this outsider, she gets it. She understands how the kingdom of God actually works. Now, I've seen this play out again and again in my own life. A big part of my job here through the week is interfacing with people in our homeless community. Oftentimes, folks will come to the campus looking for help. And one of the main goals that God has put on my heart in this job is to try and genuinely sit and employ empathy for learning people's stories, right? Because far too often our homeless community gets pushed to the margins with no one to hear their story or care about them or even give them 30 minutes in a day. Now, admittedly, I can struggle with this in my own life because I have such a busy schedule all the time, right? And to take the time, that's usually at like the most inconvenient or busiest portion of my day to sit down and talk with someone is not something that I'm always looking to do. But when I do get it right, what I frequently find is that the heart of these men and women are so oriented towards Jesus, even if they don't know it, right? They want to do the right thing. They want to even talk about ways that they can come to the church and give back and serve and get involved with our things that happen on the campus. And I am constantly in awe that someone who is in a position of suffering is willing to think about people other than themselves. And friends, I want you to know today that this is what the kingdom of God is when it's at its best. It is people from all walks of life who understand that the key to Jesus' genius is this subversive notion, this intentional shift from me to we. Because in God's economy, you have something to contribute, whether you have a bed in which to lay your head or you use the concrete as your pillow at night. Whether you're rich or poor, white, black, brown, or any shade in between. And how dare we as religious people get so stuck and set in our ways that we forget that the kingdom is so much bigger than us. Finally, we see in the last portion of Jesus' story that Jesus heals this little girl from a distance. And what is fascinating about this conclusion is that Jesus is giving this woman an immediate opportunity to put her faith into practice. He says, okay, you've said the right stuff. You've called me Lord. You said you want your daughter to be healed. You've got all the head knowledge, Jesus is saying. Now trust in me that I healed your daughter from a distance and go home to her. So the question inherently becomes, which is harder, right? To proclaim that Jesus is Lord or to live out that call in faith. And for us, the answer is clearly the latter, right? And this leads us to our third point together. It isn't enough to say you're a Christian, you have to live it out. One of my favorite lines about Christianity I heard as a kid goes like this: going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in a garage makes you a car. Right? So you can come to a place like this week after week. You can watch episode after episode on YouTube. You can give financially. You can jump into small groups. You can do an FPU. You can go to Alpha. You could serve regularly on the campus if you're in the area. But if you haven't surrendered your entire life to Jesus, including whatever prejudices still might be swirling around in your brain and heart, then I would ask you to really consider how serious you are in your faith. Now, I think it's really important to make something clear here. Right, we are all going to struggle with this to some degree. Many of us come from backgrounds that have instilled some type of prejudice in us, and it will require the work of God in our hearts for our whole lives here on earth for that to be undone. But what's important is that we are being intentional about taking steps to find Jesus and encounter him and be transparent about the work that needs to be done in our life. Until we are willing to get honest, we are going to find ourselves in the position of the religious elite. We may know a lot about God. We may know all the Christian lingo, we may know all the Christian songs, but our hearts will still be far from him. God doesn't want us to live in those prejudices. Walking with Jesus beckons us to step out of that life that we've inherited from the world and instead step into this new life where we view everyone with the eyes that God has for them. Right, to help us understand that everyone should be treated kindly, genuinely, and in a loving and worthy manner. So the question becomes for you and me, what is the takeaway of this story? What are we to do with an encounter like this? And I think the answers are twofold. The first thing is this: if Jesus is intentionally participating in tearing down structures of prejudice that are embedded in culture, we should be too. Whether that's the systems of our own heart, our churches, our friendships, our families, our societal structures, whatever. But what I want you to notice is that Jesus never just tears something down to leave it torn down. He always replaces it with something better. And this is what you and I are called to do too. Prejudice, for starters, has no place in the church. And just because we don't see it on the surface, right, doesn't mean that there isn't some insidious form of it laying around. We have to be willing to do everything that we can to do to continue growing. And that's best done by following Jesus' lead. Go talk to people that are different than you. Learn, listen, and grow. The second thing, following Jesus means challenging our religious traditions. Now, this can be a harder one for sure. Right? Our following of Jesus should be one that is constantly seeking out justice for those who are in the margins, historical, contemporary, however. Far too often, though, we see churches grow stale and complacent. An important thing for you and me to remember that the church, as Paul describes it in the New Testament, is not a building, right? That church is us. The complacency is found in us. This story reminds us and challenges us to be intentional about the way that we love people. In this case, a woman from a different race. But this also applies to people who think differently, believe differently, vote differently, etc. Because it all comes down to the idea of faith in Christ. Faith is literally the essential thing. We can argue about the rest, but the one requirement that we know that Jesus asks for is that we live a life of faithfulness, of loving God and loving our neighbor. Now, if you're curious about how you can do these things, I want to encourage you to befriend someone who you would not normally interact with. If you come to the campus, if you're local in the area, spend time with folks from different walks of life than you. Sit with someone from our homeless community on a Saturday morning. Jump into a small group and see the individuals that God brings into your life that you never would have chosen on your own, and watch how you'll grow. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the opportunity to grow. We thank you for this beautiful story. We thank you for this example of a person who would have been an outsider from one perspective, but is such a deep insider from your perspective. Lord, help us to love people like you love them, to treat them well, and to honor people because you have made all people, and all people are worthy of honor in your sight. We love you, Lord. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. The shame no longer has a place to hide, and I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your
Hey, Crossing Church, my name is Nicole. I get to be one of the pastors here at the Crossing, and I want to tell you just a couple really important things about this place. The Crossing is the place for you to explore faith and experience the life-changing ways of Jesus. And we do that through taking next steps and becoming more involved in this community, whether you're watching us online or you come to our campus. So if you're ever near our campus, I want you to know that we have services Sundays at 9:15 and 11:15. And we've got a couple events coming up if you are nearby. I would love for you to participate in. We have a women's event on February 11th. It's called the Women's Gathering. It's going to be brunch, and it's going to be encouraging and fun and a great way to make friends. And then we've got a men's huddle happening on February 18th. Same deal, it's breakfast, but a whole different tone and just some fun and a great way to meet some really good guys. So you can sign up for each of those. We've got the Women's Gathering and the men's huddle. And then I want you to know, February 12th, so that's Super Bowl Sunday, here at the Crossing on our campus, we are going to have a really fun event. The Super Bowl is all about good food and hanging out with good people, and so that's what we're going to do here after both services. We're all going to wear whatever jersey you want to wear. It doesn't have to be a football one. Come represent whoever you want to represent. And let's come play games, have some good food, and meet a couple great people. Because it's the community of the Crossing that really makes it special. Thanks so much for being here with us. Thank you for supporting the Crossing. Those of you who give to the Crossing and make it possible for us to have online services, make it possible for us to have events and get to know each other better, and then go out and serve our community. Thank you. It's your gifts that make all of that possible. If you want to support the Crossing, if you're starting to love this place, but you've never supported it in that way, go to thecrossing.com/give to give a gift today. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you online all the time and Sundays at 9:15 and 11:15. Bye-bye.